Welcome to this Phi Beta Mu Legacy Project interview. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to Mike Stough, longtime friend and someone I have admired since, gosh, back when I was a student, watching the guys who were really successful back then doing what they did. And Mike Stough's definitely one of those. Mike, welcome.
Well, thank you, Frank, and it's such a pleasure to talk to you and to do this. I'm excited to be able to share some
Great.
things with the folks out there. So I appreciate you letting me do this.
Certainly. Well, let's wind things back to the very beginning. How'd you get started in music to start with?
Okay, well, excuse me. My dad was a uh, lover of music. Now, he never played an instrument. He didn't have the opportunity to where he grew up and everything, but he loved music, and his um, I guess favorite type of music was the big bands like the Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, those people, because he grew up in that area. Excuse me, in that era, and he was he worked with a record shop in Montgomery that sold records. And so he was involved in that. So he was able to get a lot of albums and bring them home. And um, and I just kind of got to where this was back even before I started in the band. I loved listening to that. And it was really, I got really just where I enjoyed putting those albums on and listening and imagining, well, maybe, if I'd like to do that one day. But moving forward, I was in the fifth grade. Truman Welch, who
Wow,
was
that's a
legendary band
mhm.
director, was our band director. And I was a student at Eclectic Elementary School, which was in Elmore County at the time. And I can tell folks how that came to be, as we move on in this conversation. But anyway, the I remember sitting in class one day, and um, he came into the classroom, and I was in the fifth grade, and he said, "I want to talk to all of you about joining the band." I had not thought anything about joining the band. I loved the music and all, but I was like a lot of kids at that age. I was really into sports, and
Sure. Yeah.
things. And so I wasn't, really thinking about band. My older brother, was in the band, so I had some knowledge of how the band worked and everything. But um, he uh, he said, I'm here to talk to you about the band, and of course he went into some things about what the band does and all of that. So anyway, I sat there and listened, and I remember he at the end he said, "Well, who in here thinks they might enjoy being in the band?" Well, my best friend sat right across the aisle from me. He raised his hand, and I looked over there and I said, "Well, doggone it, if he's going to do it, I'm going to do it too." He ended up quitting, by the way, later.
Oh.
But anyway, it was just, in something, and I just said, well, I think it's something I would enjoy.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
went home and told my dad that I was going to join the band, and of course, he knew that I like sports and everything. And he said, "Well, you like sports so much, you think you'll really enjoy that?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think I will." I didn't know that I would be any good at it, but
Mhm.
it was just something that I was interested in. And I remember him telling me, he said, "Well, I don't know if I can afford an instrument." And um, there was a person uh, that lived close to us who's who was in the band. His parents had um, gotten him in the band early on. He was older than I was, and he had an old silver Holton cornet.
Wow.
Um, and I wish I still had that thing. That was quite an instrument. But anyway, he managed to talk to those folks, and they were willing to sell that horn for $25, and I'll never forget that. So we went over to their house the night, and we looked at and of course I was just thrilled. You know, it could have been a brand spanking new horn, and it wouldn't have mattered to me. I was thrilled. Well, we bought that horn, and I remember the one thing that he told me, or actually two things. He said, "I'm spending my hard-earned money for you to have this instrument," and he said, "And you're gonna learn how to play it."
Mhm. And you
He
did.
said,
And you
he said,
did.
you're gonna practice." He said, "You're not gonna set this thing in the case," and I admire him for that because
Absolutely.
so many times, it's easy to just let people go off by the wayside and eventually lose interest. Well, he wouldn't do that. And of course, like I say, he loved music. And so in the fifth grade, I started band. Uh, and the school that I went to was uh, called Elmore County School. It was Elmore County High School, Elmore County Elementary. And the band program there was made up of two schools.
Yes.
It was,
Many years.
yeah,
Yes.
for many years, Eclectic High School or Elmore County High School and Wetumpka High School. So anyway, I joined the band and uh, I liked it, enjoyed playing, and I was not to brag on myself, but I found out I was pretty good at it. And of course, Truman was just excited, and he encouraged me and told me, boy, one day you're going to be a great player and all of that. So, and in these albums that my daddy had brought home, I would listen to those things, and they would have like a trumpet solo or something. I'd try to sit there and figure out the notes that they were playing on the trumpet solo. And I would sit for hours and do that. And but anyway, I joined the band, and in a couple of years, I think I was in the seventh grade. I moved up into the high school band, and and still living in Eclectic. And in the eighth grade, we moved to Wetumpka.
Hmm?
So we moved to another city, but I could still stay in the same band.
Still same band. Yeah.
Yeah,
Combination between those two
right.
schools.
So
Yeah.
that was good. And I took a real interest in it. I did practice quite a bit. I still, like a lot of other kids, I'd get out and do other stuff, and everything, but I practiced and got pretty good at it. And at the end of my sixth grade year, it was in the spring of the sixth grade, Truman came to me and said, "I'm going to move you up into the high school band next year, seventh."
Wow.
But he said, "I want you to start coming to band rehearsal now just to get it." So in the sixth grade, I started
Wow.
going to the high school band. And of course, here's all these older kids, and
Oh,
here
oh yeah. Yeah.
I'm walking
Playing
in.
the yeah. Playing the literature that they were playing back then.
Right. And I remember my first rehearsal going and uh, standing out in the hallway. I didn't know what to do. And everybody went in, was taking their seat. And there was a guy, I don't know if you know him or not, but I'm sure a lot of people do, named Joseph Hull. Uh,
Joe
who,
Hull. Oh my
Joe
goodness.
Hull. Yeah.
Yes. There's a
Well,
name from the past.
same
Yes.
thing, same thing was happening to him. He had told him he wanted to move up. So he and I stood out in that hallway, and I asked him, I said, "Do you know where we go and what to do?" And he said, "No." He said, "I was hoping you did." But anyway, finally somebody came out there and said, "Well, y'all come on in and get in the seat." So that was our first high school band performance. Um, and of course, I stayed in the band all through high school. We went to a lot of different places. We went to Virginia Beach to a band festival up there, and went to um, several different places. Went to New York, Chicago, um, and marched in parades up there. Um, but I guess the big thing was that we were the first band in the state of Alabama to perform at Midwest.
Midwest. Yes. Yeah.
And that was a big deal right there. I mean, I can remember sitting on that stage and my knees were knocking, because and I had a solo. Well, Joseph and I had a duet that we had to play that day at Midwest. So we were both nervous as we could be, but um, that was a big deal, that playing at Midwest.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The first Alabama band and the only for many, many years.
Many years.
Uh,
That's right.
and if I'm correct, whereas you apply to play at Midwest, well, this particular time, Truman was asked, they came to him if the
Mhm.
story that I'd heard was correct. And
Yeah,
that's pretty much unheard of.
that's true. We when we went to Virginia Beach, um, I think it was like a year or two before we were played at Midwest. And some of the judges up there, I remember Paul Yoder was one of the judges, and I believe Al Wright was a judge, and I can't remember who the other one was, but they had heard the band before. And I think they had put a bug in Truman's ear that, hey, you need to try to get in the Midwest. And
Yeah.
the thing about what was so, I guess, amazing was that we were just two little towns that had joined together for a band,
Mhm.
and two relatively small schools. Wetumpka was a little larger than Eclectic, but to be able to have a band of that caliber in that location and be able to play at Midwest was just phenomenal. Really, I
Yeah.
look back on it today, and I still just am amazed that we were able to do that.
Mhm.
But
So just an amazing high school background. I can only imagine what you learned over the years there.
it was quite an experience. We learned a lot. We were very Truman was a disciplinarian, and he
That's what I've always heard. Yes.
and when
Yeah.
you walked in that band room, it was all business. Now we were like any other kids when we weren't practicing band and all. We'd be goofing off, but boy, when he got on that podium, it was a whole different story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and he worked us and pushed us and encouraged us to go out for all state and things
Mhm.
like that. And that of course was important to us and helped make us into good players. But we had a lot of really good players in that band when I
Yes.
came through.
Yeah.
A lot of good players.
And now at what point did you decide, I think I want to be a band director too?
Well, my senior year, let me just say that I was not the greatest student in the world as far as my academic subjects, not because I wasn't smart enough. I just goofed off a lot and everything. But when it came my senior year, I thought, well, now, I've got to figure out what I'm going to do. And I, um, I had managed to talk with the band director at Southern Miss. At the time was Bill
Okay.
Moody, William Moody, Dr. William Moody, and he had done the white band my senior year, and I was in the white band, first chair in the white band. And he talked to me about coming to Southern Miss, and I said, "Well, yeah, I'd definitely be interested in that." But 2 weeks before school was out, I'm sitting in band rehearsal, and Ed Jones was the associate director, and that's another. Talking about a dream team, that was a dream
Oh,
team.
the two of them together. Oh gosh. Yeah.
We had to learn something between those two. But we he came out and got me. He said, "You're wanted on the telephone," and that was strange in itself because you wouldn't dare get up and leave a rehearsal for anything. But when he said you wanted on the telephone, and so I got up and walked out, and it was Bodie Hinton,
Mhm.
Auburn.
Yep.
And he said, Mike, he said, have you thought about coming to Auburn? And I said, no, not really. I told him about Southern Miss and all of that. I said, but I've always liked Auburn and everything. And he said, well, why don't you come over here and take a look and see what we do over here? And he said, you might enjoy coming over here. Uh, and I did. I went over there and looked around, and I just kind of fell in love with the place. I mean, the music department over there was small at the time, the music ed department, and um, we had some good instructors. We had Bodie and Bill Walls was there, and later
Oh,
on Johnny Vinson and um, Teeny Mahaffey. They call it John Mahaffey, but Teeny Mahaffey, the great arranger, he was on staff there, and we learned a lot. But I ended up going to Auburn, and um, I was, guess, somewhere along in there, along about my senior year, the end of my senior year, I thought, well, I'm good at this. I enjoy playing the trumpet. I've enjoyed being in a band. I think I'll just be a band director. And
mhm.
so I decided to do that. And the rest is history. And I'm glad I did. I'd do the same thing over again. I really would.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
been a great experience for me.
And yeah. And then was Lynette, was that your first job?
No,
No. Okay.
my first job was in Florence, Alabama,
Okay.
at a place. Well, it's a little community outside of Florence called Green Hill, and it was Rogers High School.
Okay.
And the way I wound up there, that's a story within itself. Stacy Goss, uh, who I'm sure you know, and a lot
Another,
of people know.
absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of an honor roll of names through this interview.
He and I, we got a call from this guy. Stacy was a trumpet player, and we got a call from this guy who worked in a recording studio up in Muscle Shoals. At that time, they were doing a lot of recording, and I mean some really big names, coming out of there. And he was putting together a brass group to play in the recording studio. Want to know if we were interested, and we said, "Well, yeah, that's kind of the thing that I'd always thought about doing was playing, and so we went up there and we said, well, until we get into the studio and start to really do a lot of work, we're going to need to have a job." So we went up and I'll never forget it. We walked in the superintendent's office just out of the blue. Stacy and I did, and the secretary was in there, and we said, we're from Auburn University. We're graduating, and we're looking to move up here into this area, and we wonder if any band directing jobs are open. And lo and behold, she looked at it and said, yeah, we've got 2 band directing jobs open right now.
There you go.
And and she said, I tell you what, she said, let me call the 2 principals, see
Mhm.
if we can get them together and y'all can go talk to them. Now, this is all in one day, And so they did. And it just so happened that the 2 schools, Rogers and Brooks High School, were about 5 miles apart. So, I mean, they were real close. And so the 2 principals got together and we rode out there and met with them. And we had a good conversation. And at the end of the conversation, one of them said, well, you boys seem like y'all know what you're doing and seem to be pretty good boys. And he looked at the other principal. He said, which one do you want? and, and we're sitting there going, well, and they looked at us and said, well, which one of the jobs was starting a band, and one of the jobs
Okay. Yeah.
already had a band. Brooks had not, it was starting a band. And So Stacy and I went out under this tree, I never will forget, and talked for about 10 minutes. And I remember saying, Stacy, I don't know anything about starting a band. And he said, well, I don't know anything about directing one that's already started. So
There
we
you go.
ended up him, he took the Brooks job and I took the Rogers job. And all that happened within a span of about 2.5 hours.
My goodness.
And
You know,
that,
and
and
here these two principals are looking for band directors
yeah, it just
and
fell in our lap.
here these two college kids that wind up being Mike Stough and Stacey Goss.
Yeah.
You know.
And you know, it was funny because we didn't have resumes.
Yeah.
Anything. I've told somebody we could have been two escaped convicts and they wouldn't have known the difference. No. But we got the jobs, and of course, you know, both of us really got into teaching and
Oh yeah.
made a career out of
Outstanding
it and
careers,
loved
both
it.
of you.
And so anyway, that was my first job. And I went from there to my back to my high school in Wetumpka and worked there for 2 years.
Okay.
And then after that is when I went to Lynette.
And that was Lynette. Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember those bands, those
Mhm.
Lynette bands. There's some
Yeah,
fine
it was
places.
that was a good place back in those days to work. It was a good small town,
Yeah.
really good people, and very supportive of the band. And then I came to Opelika and was and finished my career here
Yeah. Yeah.
until I retired. And of course, I worked some in private schools after I retired and everything. But Opelika was my last real big
Mm-hmm.
school, you know, that I
Big
taught at.
school, big band,
Mhm.
and really fine. And you know, and going back to Lynette for a second, you know, a smaller school, you know, in a school that could have had kind of a nothing band program.
Mhm.
What are some of the things that you did and that you could suggest to younger band directors? You know, when you go into a place that you know that is smaller like that, what made it successful? What did you do?
Mhm. Well, that's a very, very good question. I guess the main thing was when I went to look at the job, to be honest, at that time, the band wasn't very, very good when I went to look
Mhm,
at the job. But I could see some potential there. And believe it or not, they had several really good players in that band. And met with some of the kids and I liked them and everything. And at that point in time, I felt like my career was just kind of getting going, you know.
mhm,
But I believed, for one thing, that they could have a good band. And the other thing was just, I think one of the things that I did, and one of the things that I think a lot of young directors ought to do, I wasn't afraid to seek help. If I didn't know something, I would pick up the phone and call somebody. Just backing up a little bit, when I was at Rogers,
mhm.
that my first job, Frank MacArthur was the band director at University of North Alabama, which at that time was Florence State uh, University. And he was the band director there, very, very knowledgeable, great guy, always. And I must have called him 3 or 4 times a week about something that, you know, how do you do this? What do you do? I must have worried him to death now that I look back at it, but he was very gracious.
Mhm.
And I learned a lot just by talking to him, but not being afraid to call somebody and say, look, I don't know what to do on this. Give me some
Yeah.
advice. And he always did. And then, of course, when I got to Lynette, I was still kind of in the learning mode. Of course, we always stay in the learning mode. We don't ever get out of that. But I remember I was trying to build a program and build the numbers up and all. And so I decided, well, what better way to do that than to get a guest conductor to come in here and conduct my spring concert. And we had a band banquet and get him to speak at my band banquet. So I called Johnny Long
That's a
in Troy.
good one. Yeah.
And I was getting my master's at Troy at the time, and I knew him. He said, "Oh yeah, I'd be glad to." He said, "I'll come up there." And we were having a concert that night, and the banquet was going to be after the concert. And he showed up about 9 o'clock that morning. Spent the day all day with me. We talked and talked and talked. And I picked his brain. And of course, everybody knew Dr. Long and
Absolutely.
one of the
Yes.
one of the old guard, so to speak, like
Mhm.
Truman and some of the other guys. But um, anyway, he came and talked to the people, and he just made me sound like the greatest band director that's ever lived, and how fortunate they were to have me there and everything. And uh, and they listened and they thought, well, maybe we got somebody here.
Mhm.
But through steps like that, just building program, trying to put a lot of emphasis on beginners, starting beginners, and the band just kind of caught on and grew from there, and we ended up having a pretty solid group. The
Mhm.
um, I had some really good times in Lynette, real good times. Went to a lot of different festivals and things, and did well. But they were and very nice people. They were some of the, if they liked you, they'd do anything in the world for you.
Mhm.
Of course, the opposite of that was if they didn't like you, you
Well, that,
might have a
yeah,
problem. But thank goodness they liked me. But
yeah. And
we
how
had a
many
good
years
band.
at Lynette? Um,
I spent 9 years, I
9
believe.
years.
Yeah,
Okay.
if I'm correct.
Yeah.
They, and I actually left one year and went down to Ozark and taught for a year. And I don't know, I just missed Lynette so much. They called me and wanted to know if I wanted to come back, and were going to make it worth my while. So I went back to Lynette. That was my
Yeah.
second tour of duty. Nothing against Ozark. I mean, it's a good school system too, but that's where my heart was, just in Lynette. But I loved it, and then of course when uh, being close to Opelika, Mike Cook. I know you
I remember Mike. Yes,
remember
very
Mike.
good.
Mike has passed on now, but he was the band director at Opelika, and he and I were real good friends. And he'd come to listen to my band, and I'd go to listen to his band, and we'd talk, and do stuff like that. So when he left, and actually got out of teaching, I think for a while, and he called me and said, I'd like for you to consider coming down here and taking this job, and I wanted to keep going. I want somebody good to come in, and I came and looked at it, and rest was history. I took it. I was here 15 years,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
enjoyed and did a lot of good stuff. But um, that's the biggest thing, is just getting back to your question about how did I get it going. You just work hard, and don't be afraid to seek help, and try to get along with folks. That's
Well,
one of the biggest
absolutely.
things.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, I don't be afraid to say, "Well, I don't know." If somebody asks
Mhm.
you a question, say, "I don't know, but I'm gonna do my best to find that out." And
Yeah. Yeah.
and,
And
and
Mike, I hear that over and over from the really successful folks, and they start to talk about, and so many, it was, I was in my senior year in college, and I was driving out, and this school didn't have a band director, so I'm going to school and driving it and coming back, and every day asking questions of the professors, and
yeah,
it's sort of that same thing. And some of those same names that you are talking about, Truman
yeah,
Welch, and
mhm,
the influence he had on so many people. Bodie Hinton, who was my
oh yeah,
mother's high school band director at
is that
Tuscaloosa High
right?
School. Yeah. Uh,
Tuscaloosa High School.
yeah, yeah. Ed Jones, all of these folks that just, it's just amazing. And another thing that you said when you talked about starting out as a young trumpet player and
Mhm,
getting recordings. You know,
yeah,
there's so many subjects in school where it just, what we're doing now doesn't even relate to back then.
that's right.
Computers
Mhm,
now versus computers 30, 40 years ago.
exactly.
But but band's one of those eternal things. And
Mhm.
so you're listening to recordings and learning what a characteristic sound is and what you
Right.
wanted to sound like. And my goodness, how true is that today? And how much easier is it today? Go on YouTube and just
Sure.
it.
It's all out there now. You
Mhm.
can find it in pretty much anything you want in terms
Yeah,
of, you know,
it's so much easier today, but the idea is the same. Characteristic sound, find those recordings, figure out what you want to sound like, emulate that, and then pretty soon you're
well,
pretty good.
I was really into the jazz band, and of course having Ed Jones there, Ed was a really good
Oh
jazz
yeah.
teacher. He was a fine director too, just uh, of concert band, but he really was a good. And he taught me a lot about jazz, how to play style and
Yes.
um, articulate and everything. But I learned a lot of that just by listening.
Mm-hmm.
Just sitting
Yeah.
around and listening. I can remember putting on those albums, and I just wore the grooves out on. And I can remember standing up and playing a solo, or standing up and hearing somebody play a solo, and I would sit there and try to figure it out. And I would imagine myself doing that one day.
Yeah.
Maybe one day I'm going to be standing up, and sure enough, it came to pass just like that.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so I guess there's something to that, you know, um, imagination like that. But um, I was very fortunate. We had just had some amazing people that kept us focused in the right direction, and I've tried to do that with other young band directors who. Um, for one funny story, if we got time, um,
Sure.
with Frank MacArthur, it's not really a funny story, but it's an interesting story. When I was at Rogers, very, very first job, I was going to put together a new show for this coming Friday night, and I had my drill sheets and everything, and I went out on that Monday afternoon at band practice, and we started putting together this show. Well, I guess every band director's had this happen to them. But it just wasn't working. I mean, the harder, and I was trying my best to get everything worked out and everything, and the harder I tried, the worse it got. I finally just said, "Gang, let's go home. I'm gonna figure something out, and we'll get back on it tomorrow." Well, I called Frank, and I was in a panic. And I said, "Frank, explain to him what happened." I said, "I've got this show that I've written here, and I went out and tried to put it on the field. I just couldn't get it to work." He said, "Well," he said, "you got your drill sheets with you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Come on over to the house and bring your drill sheets,
Mhm.
and we'll sit down and we'll figure this thing out." I went over there, and I bet you I stayed till 10 o'clock that night. Um, and we sat there and wrote a drill in a show right there, and he helped me with that, and went back the next day, put it together. It worked fine. But that's the kind of help that
Mhm.
I had,
Yeah.
and it's so important, to young band directors to have that, and so it was
Absolutely. Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you had some fine people coming along.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
amazing, and of course the results speak for itself. So,
mm.
Mike, again, thanks for spending this time with me. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I know
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
everybody who listens to it will. I think if everybody will take a little something different from it. So,
Sure, sure.
uh, Mike Stough, congratulations on a wonderful career and Phi Beta Mu Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that was quite an honor. I was a little surprised, but it was quite an honor.
Yeah, and well deserved. So,
Mm.
again, thanks so much for spending this time with us.
Well, I appreciate it, Frank, and you have a good one, and thank you for inviting me to do this.